episode of History Hack. Before we get onto the good stuff, a few reminders. If you enjoy the podcast, please do go over to Apple and give us a 5-star review. It's immensely helpful for us to be able to reach even more listeners. We also have a shiny new website, which I'd encourage you to check out at www.historyhack.co.uk, where you can see a great big awesome cartoon by Steve at the top and a Meet the Team page and then some useful links as well. If you'd like to support us further, and thank you so much if you're able to do so, you can buy us a drink on Ko-Fi, which is ko-fi.com/historyhack. We've also revamped our Patreon page, which can be found at www.patreon.com/historyhack, which has various levels on there of support and various perks as well, including some interesting ones relating to our very own Chris, so do go and check that out. And now that's out of the way, I can introduce our guests for today's episode. Good to be back and looking forward to today's episode, which will be of particular interest to any fans of Bridgerton who may have just been binge watching the new series, and also anyone interested in the Regency period. So we have two returning guests today. So we have Julie Tadeo and Katherine Byrne, and they're the authors of books including Rape in Period Drama Television, and they're co-editors with James Leggett of the edited collections Conflicting Masculinities, Men in Television Period Drama, and Diagnosing History, Medicine in Television Period Drama. Julie is Research Professor of History at the University of Maryland, and Katherine is Lecturer in English at Ulster University. Thanks very much both for coming back to us.
It's great to see you again, Beth.
I'm glad to be here.
Lovely to see you both too, and I know we've all been binge watching Bridgerton over the last few days and weeks. At least the second half of the season, we've all just kind of been binge watching since the end of what was end of last week for when we were recording. So yes, we have very much to discuss. So I'll kick us straight off in with our first question. I'd be interested to know from both of you what your expectations were for this third season. I mean, we've had quite a long wait. I think it was about 2 years or so, if I'm correct. And we've all seen the first 2 seasons and the Queen Charlotte spin-off, and some of our viewers may have as well. What were you both expecting this time around?
I couldn't wait for it to start again, Beth. It just seemed so long, didn't it? I was kind of impatiently kind of checking scheduling to see when it would start. I was hoping for kind of a more contemporary feel to the relationship issues, and I wasn't disappointed. I really wanted, and I happily got, a kind of more modern relationship, a more modern marriage. You know, the fact that Penelope wants an identity, is kind of searching for herself. It felt very something that could confront a modern viewer, something that we all have dealt with, and particularly the issues around career and relationships. I mean, those are things that should be part of the past, but of course they're not. We still juggle those things today as modern women, unfortunately. So it was lovely to see that explored in this new series.
I prepared by watching seasons 1 and 2 all over again. In fact, I think I may have watched them twice over. So, and actually it was a good thing to do, because thinking about all of the issues that get raised in season 3, so many themes came out, and I thought, oh, they were preparing me for all of this, especially with certain character arcs. So I mean, for me, it ticked most of the boxes. I wasn't disappointed. Like Kate, I like the modern retelling. I don't have a problem with that as a historian. I just wish that I had recognized some of the musical scores that got done with the Vitamin String Quartet. I was a little embarrassed when my daughter had to tell me who they were.
Me too.
I always find that's one of the most fun games of each season, is trying to guess who the songs are by. But this time I noticed even the Bridgerton accounts themselves were like sending out lists on Twitter beforehand saying, here's all the songs featuring. And I was like, no, I don't want to see, don't show me. Like, I like to guess. But, it doesn't always guarantee success.
True.
And we have to start with talking about Penelope Featherington and Colin Bridgerton as our leads for this season. And they, of course, have a very different arc from season 2, because we had the whole enemies to lovers route of Kate Sharma and Anthony Bridgerton, which lots of people were fans of and enjoyed their dynamic. But this time, Penelope and Colin, we've known since the first season that Penelope has feelings for Colin, and we've seen their friendship throughout that time. And then, of course, season 3, we start to see that blossom into something more. So for Penelope, she has a very big season because, as well as her feelings for Colin, she's got the contention with the marriage mar, and she decides she does want to marry this season. And she's also going through her broken friendship with Eloise Bridgerton. And then there's so much going on. Lady Whistledown as well, all of that coming to a head. What did the two of you make of this season for Penelope as leading lady?
I was just so delighted to see her kind of blossom and come into her own and finally get kind of center stage instead of her wallflower status. And I know so many viewers felt the same, even though a lot of the criticism of the show this season was a bit mixed at times, but nobody complains about Penelope finally kind of becoming a swan. And she just looks so amazing. I just loved seeing her on screen. She's so beautiful anyway, but just allowed to kind of really make the most of herself in this season, and indeed to celebrate a more voluptuous body, which we don't see. Body positivity hasn't filtered through to television as much as it should have, certainly not here in the UK. It was just really wonderful to see her kind of voluptuous body really kind of look amazing in every scene, and the camera lingers on her and really enjoys her. So I really enjoyed that. I was slightly less convinced by the romance between her and Colin and I wondered, was it much about my own expectations? Maybe I like the rake too much. We're talking maybe more about masculinity later. But yeah, I felt she was just wonderful, but their romance perhaps wasn't as much chemistry as I wanted. But I know many viewers didn't agree with me at all. And I just love the Cinderella storyline as well, with her and her two evil sisters and the mother, and the dynamics there, which are at once kind of fairy tale-esque but also really quite nuanced by the end too. It really explores family as much as it does romance, and I think that's one of the things viewers really respond to most about this show.
Yeah, going on social media, it was funny to see how many people were replaying the carriage scene, filling the gap till they had to wait a few weeks for the second part of season 3. I do want to just add, because I did read all of the books, so I was so pleased with how they changed Colin, as well as all of the men. If you've read the books, they're very dated, even for the early 2000s. The men, the way that they approach the women in the book, it's always with this kind of violence. They're always grabbing and bruising, or they're using sex in a way to achieve power over these women. And Colin does it at times in the book, sex and guilt, and that kind of aggressive masculinity is not so appealing now, at least not to me. So I like that they've changed his character a bit. For me, the biggest plus, yes, the body positivity. But in the book, first of all, Penelope's a lot older. So the timeline is different. She's, I think, around 27, 28. So she's been on the shelf and just kind of accepted it. Now she's only, what, 19, approaching 20. And the big glow up for her doesn't involve weight loss as it does in the book. She slimmed down. All she did was just put on prettier colors that complemented her and changed her hairdo. And that's all she needed, to get more confidence. It's Colin who's lost weight and toned up his body. If you look at him in season 1, he still looks like this little boy, with his baby cheeks. And he's really been working out and losing weight. And I just think that that's wonderful that they didn't put her through that or change actresses as some shows would do. So she didn't need that to feel more confident. It had to come from inside. It wasn't about her exterior so much.
I love seeing her stand up to people as well. She constantly kind of, by the end of the series, series 3, she's really able to answer everybody back when they're being horrible to her, whereas we've seen her passively kind of accepting it in the first 2 seasons, and using her pen, of course, to get revenge secretively. But in season 3, she will answer her mother and her sisters, and particularly even Colin at times. There's a great dynamic there. I love a scene where she's out late at night and she meets him in the street, and he goes, what are you doing here? What secrets have you got? You shouldn't be out alone late at night. And she says, well, you're out alone. Why am I not allowed to? And there's a real kind of feminist moment there, albeit one that becomes very sexy very quickly as well.
Yeah, and in the book too, with the big reveal, it isn't Penelope standing in the center of the ballroom telling her story. It's Colin with the help of Anthony. they're the ones who do the reveal for her. And there were some fans too. I was shocked that they didn't like the new version. They like the idea of Colin being her champion, but it's her story to tell. And that's what she tells him. I don't need you to save me. I just need you to stand by me. And this season has been all about female empowerment. So I'm so glad they made that change. It wasn't his story to tell.
No, I completely agree, and it's as you say, Julie. Some of the things in the books that I know we've spoken about before between ourselves and perhaps on our last podcast, some of the things are very dated. Like we'll talk about Lady Danbury later, who's an excellent character in the show. She's just awesome. She's so cool. She's so fierce but multifaceted. Like she's just brilliant. But in the books, you have characters like Anthony calling her this like the old dragon or the crone or things like that. So the show has kind of moved on from some of those dated parts of the books. And our discussion there on Colin and Penelope goes well to our next question, where we're going to discuss Colin specifically. And he has quite an interesting shift from, I guess, the first part of the season, which was released, to the second, where at the beginning, he's kind of freshly back from his travels, and he's, as we kind of discover later, he's very much trying to like present himself as a particular kind of masculine regency gentleman. Like he's very much not really being himself, not really showing his emotions. So we've had lots of those kind of funny scenes in that first part of Colin just trying to act like a rake, really. And there's like that one scene with that outrageous wink he does to one of the women, where it's just very entertaining. And the hot air balloon. Yeah, that was a scene for sure. Yeah, very yeah. So Colin is very trying to be something he's not at the beginning, but as we discover at the end, he's revealing more of himself, and he's actually very emotionally intelligent. So it's interesting to kind of consider what Colin's masculinity and also the masculine conventions that he's trying to adhere to at the beginning of the season. What did you both think about Colin as a whole in season 3?
He feels like a really kind of metafictional commentary on all sorts of period drama heroes, doesn't he, Julie? It's like we're self-consciously kind of thinking all about the kind of man we expect to see on screen in these sorts of shows. So that's why he's playing at the rake, which is the figure that we like so much and we recognize straight away from the Regency period. And then obviously that's not his true self, as you've just been noting, and he becomes really something constructed much more for the modern viewer. The whole point about Bridgerton is it's a fantasy. It came to prominence during the pandemic when, God knows we all needed a bit of escapism. And it still maintains that today. What we really want from a man is someone who can play the game, but then as actually a true feminist, truly supportive, truly kind. And it really celebrates that kindness, particularly in the last episode where you see him completely support Penelope and forgetting or forgiving everything that's gone before. And I think, though, we need re-educated in some ways about what makes a romantic hero, because we are used to seeing a different kind of person. I really enjoyed Anthony in season 2, but at the same time, part of me is thinking, well, actually, you should like Colin a lot better because he's much nicer, and we should like nice guys, but we're not used to seeing them on screen, and so there is a bit of a re-education going on. I think with him, he really shows us the way men could be, should be, but, we all know weren't in the 19th century at all, sadly.
Anthony's a lot better on screen than in the book. And that scene when they're in the library and he's stepping on her hand, and that's supposed to be a turn on for her. Like, oh, again, I think Netflix has done a brilliant job with some of these men. I want to point out the white puffy shirt because it is something that we expect now in period dramas. We think about, obviously, Colin Firth, Mr. Darcy, the shirt is wet, and Anthony in season 2 does the nods to that when he falls in the lake, and the women are staring at it, clinging to him in a way that was so much sexier than Colin Firth's white shirt, right? It was so tame. Colin, I love the scene because he's just come back from his tour, which Napoleonic Wars he wouldn't have been able to do, but we'll push that aside. And he's in the carriage and he's changing, and he's putting the shirt on, whereas for all the other men, they're either taking it off or it's getting wet. And I don't know if Netflix intended that or not, but it is that he is a different kind of a rake who's not really comfortable. He's not comfortable being a rake. He's playing at it. When he finally tells the guys off in the club, Like, don't you think we shouldn't be talking like this about something that's so important? And they look at him like, dude, what's your problem? That's when you know, like, even that threesome that he was totally bored by it. Like, he's playing at being the rake. So I like that. I like that he puts for him, it's putting the shirt on, not really taking it off. That's more important. And, this is a show that caters to women and their pleasure. And the carriage scene wasn't about him, it was about Penelope. And I think that's why fans loved Colin in this season 3 so much. That, you could have ended the season right there.
The carriage scene was just,
It
yeah,
was
it was.
done. There is one thing too, though, that I don't know if Netflix understood what it was doing here or not. The final scene when Penelope is now going to write as herself, but we don't really know what she's going to write. Like, who's going to want to read her sheet that's not about gossip? In the book, she says that she'll write a novel, the story of a wallflower, who becomes, like her. And that's wonderful. But the reality is that as the brothers are passing around Colin's leather-bound book, it's that kind of writing that men do that's going to be prioritized and seen as serious literature. So even if she does write either her column or a romance novel, her scribbling will never be seen as serious as her husband's writing. Maybe Netflix will prioritize it, but the reality is that, everything she does is kind of secondary. It's producing the heirs that's going to be more important.
Yeah, and I know we're meant to be happy for her, but I just felt slightly annoyed by the producing of the male heir, because there's even, aren't there, in the last, one of the final scenes, there's 3 babies lined up and the 2 girls are clearly less important than the heir, and I know that's factually accurate, but deeply problematic, just from a modern perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I guess she saved her family, the Featheringtons, by producing the male heir, but
It just feels,
again, it is a
yeah,
reminder. Like, her mom has told her, what did she say? It's a great power, that thing you have made for yourself. But it really is now just what she makes for others and for both families that's going to be more important.
yeah, those last scenes just made me feel it's the womb is really still where the true power lies, and that is reductive, no matter how much Netflix tries to make it otherwise. But it's true. It was true, I suppose. But I love that carriage scene. I just thought that was really remarkable telly, because, and so many people have talked about it to me and said, that really felt like an unusual moment on screen, because it wasn't just about penetration, which sex on TV just always is, including Bridgerton.
No, I think that's all really interesting, your thoughts there about Colin and his progress throughout the season. I mean, it's actually interesting where you say there, Catherine, about Colin being very different from that Regency rake, and kind of us reassessing our expectations of the Regency romantic male lead. Because I think Benedict will also be quite an interesting study in that respect, as another character who's quite different from Anthony and Simon.
Yeah, I know we're going to talk maybe about Benedict later, but I can't wait to see what happens to him in the next season. He's always been my favorite of the brothers, and I just think he's got real potential to kind of again take this role of the male lead to new places.
No, I completely agree. He's been my favourite of the Bridgerton brothers as well since the beginning, so very much looking forward to that. And so we're going to return to the women for now. And of course, Bridgerton is centred around the young women on the marriage mart, in theory, but obviously we see lots happening to other characters as well, of varying ages. And Bridgerton often shows the risks to these women of being embroiled in a scandal, as we've seen in the previous seasons. So in season 3, we see Eloise Bridgerton keeping a low profile following her difficulties of season 2. And then Cressida Cowper, who's been a thorn in Penelope and some of the other women's side for a while, her schemes backfire and she is sent away in disgrace at the end of the series. In which ways was scandals something that young upper class women in the Regency had to be mindful of?
One of the things the series does really well is kind of highlight that double standard. That the men in the 19th century, and indeed throughout human history, really can get up to anything that they want, but a woman can't even be left alone in a room with a man unless she's got a chaperone. That kind of shocking unfairness is really kind of brought home by the show, and it does really, represent that fragility of female reputation. But there are many things, mind you, that it doesn't do. There are scandals it won't touch, so it could do more. For example, except probably no one wants to see it on our screens, with venereal disease. I mean, every time they're in a brothel, I know you feel the same, Julie. Every time they're in a brothel, I'm just going, what are they contracting there if this was real? But that's something the show hasn't wanted to engage with at all. And unplanned pregnancy, which it does obviously deal with in season one, but which would be a much more common occurrence for women. It hasn't returned to that plot line, but actually that would have been a daily reality for the women who are doing any sort of extramarital sex.
Yeah, I recall when they're doing the poetry night in the earlier season, and there was a reference to Byron. And, he's a contemporary of these people. And the year before the first season of Bridgerton is set, in 1812, he'd had that scandalous affair, right, with Caroline Lamb. And he goes unscathed by the whole thing, and it destroys her life. And I think there's other things at play with her as well. But the moment she publishes her novel with these kind of unveiled references to people in the tone, she's blacklisted, right? She's just ousted from society. And he's totally fine to do as he pleases and whore around with anybody. And that is, of course, the double standard. Now, there is some evidence, obviously, that we know from some famous society women that, once they've married, they've produced their heirs. If they're careful, discreet, they can have, their fun on the side. Widows, though, still kind of a double standard. You got to be careful. You can't marry a younger man. The society books are telling you that it's grotesque. But men, of course, are marrying much younger women, and everyone thinks that's perfectly fine. So, yeah, they're just constantly subject to these sexual double standards. But scandal, some of the scandal sheets are written by women, like the female Tatler, which precedes, something like Lady Whistledown. And as for all evidence points to it being written by a woman. So women are part of this culture of surveillance too. They've internalized it, and they police other women as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of women, really being surveilling and being all over everything. I mean, it has to be the matriarchs of the ton who, as I said, the show is predicated on the premise of the young women entering the marriage mart and hoping to have good prospects. But actually, it's some of the mature women of Bridgerton who are some of the richest characters and have some of the most fun storylines. And this has continued happily into season 3. And I'm thinking about Portia Featherington as one example here, who's Penelope's mother. And she has another interesting season and continues to show all of the complexities in her character, of which there are many. And by the end, she and Penelope, they always have a very rocky relationship. But by the end, we're getting, the signs that they're actually starting to understand each other better. What did you think of Portia this season? I mean, she had a very tumultuous season 2 before.
I love Portia. She's one of my favorite characters. Just even the way she dresses, she's so beautiful, and so kind of spiky and monstrous. And then you feel sorry for her. I just think she's got it all going on there. It's incredible. But I also feel her whole storyline, her narrative arc, is really quite historically accurate and quite gritty, actually, because it does remind us how vulnerable women were. Even though she's in theory made the right kind of marriage herself, but she shows us how that can go wrong, how you can be kind of left to fend for yourself, really how patriarchy as a system failed women, quite aside from their rights, it failed women in practical terms as well. Women were taught to be dependent on men, but actually often those men were incapable of supporting them financially, quite apart from emotionally, in the way they needed to be supported. So she does have to fend for herself, and she's pretty tough. She doesn't let her own personal desires, sexual desires, or emotions get in the way. She's a survivor, and we all love to see a survivor on screen. She's kind of anti-hero in the show in a really good way, I think. But she is not, as you've noted, Beth, not a great mother. Makes a lot of mistakes, and it is nice to see her and Penelope kind of come to a better understanding of that. But it is a reminder of one of the kind of darkest plot lines in the show, actually, which is the way that mothers fail their daughters, and that's something that comes up again and again. Even in the Bridgerton family, Violet fails her daughters at times, and in quite serious ways, which the show, because it's a escapist, kind of wants to skate over, but actually there are issues there with family relationships. But Portia is the most extreme example of that.
I mean, I think the Featherington stories are even more interesting than the Bridgerton stories. It was funny, though, because my husband, when he would come in and watch little bits and pieces, pretending he wasn't interested in the show. And the moment he saw Polly Walker, he's like, oh, that's that woman I love from Rome. Like he's never forgotten her. And I thought that was funny because she is, I think she's just this big presence. She's so cool. And you could see why the younger Lord Featherington wanted her and not her daughter.
Yeah.
But she doesn't have time for that nonsense. Whereas I think Violet is so obsessed with the romance and the passion that she often, I think Francesca's right, that she misses out on some really important aspects of her daughters and what they really need. And the flashback scenes in the previous season, when, obviously she's a young widow and she's grieving the loss of her husband, but she's got a newborn and she's got a household to run and seven other kids. And she does kind of like drop the ball and let them down in the past. So it's good to see that she's not perfect. I kind of think about, the way that Mrs. Bennet has always been misunderstood in Pride and Prejudice, and the film versions always turn her into this frivolous woman. It's the husband who lets down those daughters, right? He's just lazy and doesn't care about their future. He comes through in the end, but Mrs. Bennet is really doing all the heavy lifting to make sure that her daughters have a secure future at a time when marriage is their really only option. So I think Lady Featherington is kind of like a darker Mrs. Bennet, and that's kind of why I like her.
Yeah, all these narratives really have this idea of, the evil stepmother, or even if she's the real mother, that she's inadequate or jealous or toxic in some way. And one of the important things this show does is kind of show the complexities of that, why they are the way they are, how they might try to be better, how they're ultimately looking out for you, but you can't always see it at the time. And also how our expectations of older women are really problematic because we do judge them and we do have this idea that they're jealous and they're rivals, or they're stupid or flimsy in their intellectual endeavors, just like Mrs. Bennet. So I think she's part of a huge narrative we have from fairy tales onwards about middle-aged or older women and mothers that we haven't managed to escape from yet.
I think I like when when Portia tells her daughter, because nobody really idolized the father. Everyone kind of knew he was a bum. He gambled away the family money. He wasn't really concerned about his daughter's future. But, she has to remind her, like, I am the way I am because your father let us all down. So I've had to do this. And, Violet got lucky that she had a man who wasn't like Lord Featherington. But I think for most of the women in the town, the marriage really is kind of a crapshoot, and they could all end up with a Lord Featherington.
Absolutely. And I mean, another of the characters who had an awful marriage, as we saw in Queen Charlotte, was Agatha, Lady Danbury, where that was just, yeah, a kind of bordering on or even, an abusive marriage. So we really got to understand her background more in Queen Charlotte when we saw her younger self. And that brings us on to her friendship with Violet, who we've just been discussing. As we know from Queen Charlotte, Agatha had a relationship with Violet's father, and we start to see that coming out a little bit more in season 3, where they're usually so playful and honest with each other, and then we get this kind of emotive but slightly held back kind of conversation at the end where they just bring up that kind of dreaded topic of Lord Ledger, Violet's father. I mean, what did you both make of Violet and Agatha's friendship this season? I mean, there's a lot going on. There's Agatha making matchmaking attempts to stop Violet, and Agatha's brother Marcus continuing something they've been striking up together, which is a side of her that we haven't really seen, which is quite fun. What did you both kind of think about the way their friendship progressed this season? And yeah, did you find there were enough kind of conversations had there about things, such as Lord Ledger?
The show's representation of middle-aged women it's unique and it is really important. I think period drama has long been one of the few genres of television which has always had great roles for women over 45. I'm thinking particularly of Downton, and no one will forget Violet the Dowager Countess in Downton, played by Maggie Smith, who just stole the show in every scene she was in. So hopefully, I mean, that was a long tradition for period drama, which wasn't reflected on screen in other genres, I don't think, but hopefully that is obviously beginning to change. But Bridgerton does something different in portraying them not just as formidable characters and matriarchs, but actually as attractive women with libidos and needs, and also in showing their friendship in certain ways as well, which is really important. And A lot of female viewers have obviously responded to that, but I know, Julie, you felt, and I agreed, that we're actually a bit dissatisfied with some of the ways that Violet's character has been developed in this season, or rather not developed, compared to what was hinted at previously.
Yeah, I think in terms of their friendship, it was great, because it is kind of a difficult thing to know that the woman who is your good friend also slept with your father. I think it was only once, but that's okay. So how do you get over that? Because then it means he cheated on her mother and their marriage wasn't perfect. And she has all these illusions about marriage, right? So, but I think that's okay. I do love, as you said earlier, the way that they age down and really give, I mean, the biggest glow up of all from the book to the screen is Lady Danbury. She's always discussed as this ugly, evil, old kind of intimidating crone hitting people with her cane. And here the cane is just this cool accessory, and her hats. She is gorgeous. I mean, all of the older women are gorgeous. The actress Ruth Jamel, who plays Violet, she's actually 56, playing a woman who's almost a decade younger. That's rare in TV, right? And they're just beautiful, and I love the way that it is their friendship. Like, I value my friendship with you more than I would value a relationship with your brother, and I think that's important. And female friendship was definitely front and center in this season. But yes, I do want to talk about my disappointment with Violet, because Queen Charlotte was all about Violet, after more than 10 years as a widow, finally acknowledging that, look, I'm still young and I want my garden tended. I mean, she loves those botanical metaphors. And that was what we were expecting in season 3, right? When that gorgeous Marcus, walks into the room. And when he comes to visit her at home the first time, she has this dress on that has flowers that are blooming towards while they approach her waistline, and they get into full bloom at the waistline, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And then what do we get after 8 episodes? They finally have their little timid dance at the end. So I have to wait 2 years now to see where this relationship goes. I kind of like to see the hot and heavy passion with the older characters as well. you know so for me, I was a little disappointed.
Let's hope it comes in the next season. Definitely, she's waited long
Yeah.
enough, hasn't she, Julie?
Absolutely, the flowers have already wilted. No, but I was kind of bummed about that.
No, absolutely. When she said that, I was like,
Like,
yeah,
okay, at least show them in bed. It doesn't have to be a, yeah.
just something a bit more than just one dance. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say that the one show I couldn't rewatch was Queen Charlotte. I think it was really well done, but some of those scenes were just too difficult. The constant scenes in bed with her gross old husband,
Yeah.
the head banging on the board, and the scenes of them, treating the king for a mental illness.
Yeah.
Really important, and I'm going to totally use them in other stuff, but I can't rewatch it. It was too difficult.
Whereas Bridgerton's even more enjoyable the second time. I really agree with what you were saying. You really notice a lot of things that you didn't notice before.
You do, like, I miss so many little period details that they tucked in,
Mm.
things that were really nice. And you could see, the two historical advisors have been Hannah Gregg and Amanda Vickery this season. Oh, I envy them.
No, that's completely understandable, and I think Queen Charlotte is probably still my favorite series. But I completely appreciate that some of that is would be very difficult to watch again. So soon after seeing it for the first time, as you say, some very harrowing scenes there. Um, and back to Bridgerton season 3. I wonder what you thought of the storyline of the Mondrich family, because we've seen them since the first season, as far as I remember, and they've suddenly have this elevation in their status in season 3. What could you, tell our viewers a bit about that, and what you thought of that storyline, because that was quite different, having this family properly entering the
Yeah,
ton
I know
now.
there were a lot of mixed reactions on social media, like, what do they add to the story? Why do we care? It's true, they're already married, so there's not going to be any great dramatic tension there. But I think in terms of the class issue, because the show I know does a lot about race, but it also tackles class. The modiste, Sienna's character in season 1, and the Mondriches are really important because making that leap is not so easy. Like, Anthony couldn't have married Sienna. It would be very rare. It happened once in a while with Charles Fox marrying the former lover of the prince, right? Who I think she was an actress at one point, but that would be weird, very unusual. But they've made the leap. But I think in terms of class and masculinity, it's a good storyline because Will is not comfortable in this new role. He was a boxer. Used his own efforts, to open up his business, his club. For him, work is the essence of his masculinity. And now he's living off of this income that's going to his little son and has to play the peacock. And his wife is enjoying it because she's tired of working hard. But for him, he feels really useless as a man and as a provider. So I think it's a good storyline in dealing with these issues about upper class masculinity versus working class masculinity, and also kind of exposing some of the frivolities of the life of the tone, which he's observing as the outsider insider.
I'd love to see more on class really from the show, because one of the things I think it doesn't do is give any kind of inner life to the servants, who are, present in so many scenes, but unlike something like Downton, we don't get any interiority, they don't get any, romances or development of their own. They're just kind of there to serve the upper class characters, with the exception, of Will. So it'd be really nice to see more of that in the future, and kind of perhaps expand on the class tensions in the show a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point back to season two when Eloise struck up a friendship with Theo, who I think was a printer's boy. Was that right? And that was a really interesting storyline where, they had this short lived friendship, and she was going to all of these meetings and, reading pamphlets. And, Eloise obviously is kind of very, politically aware in some ways. And in the third season, she tried to remove herself from that part of herself and just be more in the ton and not draw attention. But yeah, that was something that was, I felt like cast was a bit more in season two in that respect, with kind of Theo and Eloise's storyline that perhaps we didn't
Yeah, it
have
just kind of
Yeah,
dropped
something
out
like
that
that
plot
this
line, didn't it? It
season.
was kind of a shame, because there was potential there to do more with that.
yeah, and I like the way Theo called her out, like, "Oh, ladies like you, go slumming over here," which, there's a possibility. I'm really nervous about Eloise's story, and we won't know for 2 years where it's headed, just because in the books, spoiler alert, she marries Philip Crane, who is Marina's husband. Marina is actually related to, I think, the Bridgertons and not the Featheringtons in the book. And after Marina dies by suicide, she drowns herself. Eloise starts writing to Philip, and then she kind of just runs off and stays with him, and then they have this great sex and get married. But I feel like Marina has just got, she deserves a better storyline. And I don't want Eloise to end up, finding happiness because Marina has to kill herself, especially since we know the actress herself dropped out of the show. She was struggling with some mental health issues. So I know fans are devoted to keeping the storylines intact, but I really hope they veer away from the book in this respect.
Yeah, the kind of woman that Eloise is, like a kind of prototype new woman, as it would be called by the end of the century, doesn't usually have a happy ending in the books of the period. They usually end up killing themselves or unhappily married off, because the kind of aspirations they have and their early feminism just doesn't have a place yet in that world. So I know, because Eloise is such a fan favorite, that won't happen to her, but it will be interesting to see how her story unfolds and how she can achieve her potential even within the confines of that century.
Yeah, it was sad watching her trying to behave this season and becoming the wallflower that she shouldn't be. Not because I want her to be surrounded by men, but just I want men to appreciate her intelligence. I want everyone else to appreciate. But everyone keeps saying, you talk a lot, but what are you going to do? Well, if they don't ever let her leave Mayfair, what can she do? So I'm glad she realizes that in the end. Like, I've got to get out of this house. Francesca, for her, it was the same thing. Like, we've got to get out of this house. I'm one of 8 children, so I know how wonderful it can be. But you also kind of lose your own identity when you're part of this big group. They kind of swallow you up. So for me, that was an important storyline. Like sometimes you just need to be on your own.
For me, from a small family, though, I felt the complete opposite, Julie. It's so funny you say that, because I'm just so envious of their many brothers and sisters, and the fact there's a real community there and they can support each other. And as I was suggesting, that's one of the true successes of the show, that it really makes you, that this fantasy of support and kinship from siblings is, that's the true charm of the Bridgertons. It's not the money, it's the family and the solidarity there. So I'm like, Eloise, why would you leave this and go to Scotland? Francesca, why would you be moving so far away? You've got everything you want right here.
I can understand though where she's fed up with her brothers who have all the advantages and all they do is whine. Like, I know you guys love Benedict, but come on. You know, there are options as one of the younger sons. Join the military. There's plenty of wars to fight right now. You know, and you'll be an officer or get yourself a nice position, you know, in the church, whatever. Stop whining. Like, you know, your sister who's smart wasn't able to go to university or do a grand tour. So I think they just, which is the way of life. All the advantages go to some people and they don't appreciate it.
I'd say the church and the military might curtail their activities somewhat, and that's why they
For
haven't seen
sure.
it. Yeah, they wouldn't be having such fun.
Although,
Well, maybe
hey,
not.
Bill Dark, Ozzy didn't stop him.
Yeah, I do love seeing the brothers having a good time, you know, in their club and late at night and all the drink they consume, and you know, they know how to party, don't they? But it's sad the women don't get to share that. Sorry, I was just going to say you get a real feel for the potential of London in the 19th century as well, of all the mystery and glamour that it has to offer, from their brothels to, you know, to their clubs and everything else. And it's only Penelope who you see briefly kind of penetrate that because she is able to move around, you know, albeit dressed as a servant. Late at night, you see her as a kind of flaneur who's able to walk the streets a little bit, but always with the risk of being uncovered and found out, whereas the men can just do whatever they want, and enjoy all the pleasures of the city. Again, it's frustrating to see how women are excluded from those public spaces.
No, I was just going to say, I can't remember what season it was, but the scene where Lady Danbury's hosting one of her raucous gatherings, and there's, oh, I think it's at season one, and she brings Daphne
Mm.
along to meet the other married women of the ton, and they're just all drinking and playing cards, and it was just like, I don't think we've had a scene quite like that again, where we're just seeing them in their own element and having fun together as women, and not having to kind of worry
Yeah,
about
that's a
bounds
great
of
scene.
It's a
propriety
fun
like
scene.
that.
Yeah.
Because women did gamble. They did. They went to the clubs. We see that in Poldark with Caroline, right? Where she's going to London and she's gambling. She's hanging out with the men and drinking. Once you're married, there's more freedoms that are allowed to you. As a single woman, Daphne would have been excluded from that party. And it's what Lady Tilly says, you know, I've got servants who don't talk. I'm sure she pays them very well. So what she does behind closed doors, as long as she's careful, there, you know, we know that there were some women who enjoyed some of these pleasures that men did. But if they were discovered in public, obviously they would be punished for it.
Absolutely, that double standard coming in again. And I mean, it felt like the season was over so quickly, just with 8 episodes in two parts of four. And it felt like suddenly we'd got to the end, and there were all of these new romances being teased for future seasons. So among them, we had Francesca, where obviously she's just newly married, and then she meets her husband's cousin, Michaela Sterling, and then it's like, oh wait, hang on, do I actually have an attraction to her? And oh, I've just got married to this man. And then we also have Benedict, of course, who there's a little tease at the end where he speaks of Violet planning her famous masquerade ball. And if I'm right, I haven't read that book. I believe he meets his romantic storyline character Sophie at a masked ball. What did you both think of kind of, those little teasers of romances in the finale? And we can obviously talk about what's been changed from the book as well, such as Michaela for a start. What did you both think of those kind of teasers, and what would you like to see from the coming
I don't know if you
seasons?
saw the Daily Mail article yesterday, and it was about that in the fans' reaction. And I just laughed because I was watching it with my 18-year-old daughter, and the moment that Michaela comes on, and there is that, Francesca's tongue tied, as her mother said she was when she met her father. And my daughter's like, hell yeah. And I'm like, yeah, this woman is gorgeous. Unfortunately, this happens, while she's still a newlywed, but in the books, again, spoiler alert, she does have a happy marriage with John. And unfortunately, but there's an infertility storyline, which a lot of readers are very attached to, and they feel that that's an important storyline for them. So they're afraid that by changing Michael, who's the cousin to Michaela, that will be lost. There were others too, we saw, because the Daily Mail quotes some of the some of the tweets and the anger that fans have, like, oh, they're trying too hard for inclusivity. Like this lesbian relationship would never be tolerated. In fact, to me, they're like, oh, they're the latest ladies of Langolin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But the lesbian couple that the Queen secured a pension for. So they could live out their old age in Wales. And then there were postcards that the Tone bought of them. And they were like celebrities that the Tone would go and visit. And there are like some other little cartoons at the time of women flirting behind their husband's back. They're flirting with each other and the men are oblivious. So it's not like this didn't happen. Uh, but Michael's character for me is really problematic in terms of, for me, he's one of the most unlikable of the rakish heroes. The scenes of, in the book to me are really problematic. So I really prefer McKellar. I gotta say, I'm happy with that change.
Given that Bridgerton has made a name for itself mostly through experimental for period drama sex scenes, it seems only appropriate that it kind of broadens its repertoire here. I mean, we haven't seen two women together so far, apart from in a threesome for male pleasure, like as Julie was talking about, Colin's threesome. So I think it's really important that it kind of moves beyond the heteronormative next season, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. It's all about the female gaze as well, with a lot of female viewers, so it's important to kind of foreground female pleasure, and it did start to do that, as I said, in the carriage scene where Penelope's pleasure is more important than Colin's, and I think that's one of the things it's doing that's really remarkable on television.
And I had some problems with the threesome scenes with Lady Tilly and Paul because it was staged so much like a Victoria's Secret commercial where she's modeling her gorgeous lingerie, which was really cool.
It was,
Uh,
yeah.
but she finally, raises the issue that is a reality that, yeah, I'm jealous. Like it was fun in the beginning, but you want him more than you want me. I mean, those kinds of those emotions, those human emotions have to be addressed. So I was kind of glad that they had this honest conversation. What he wants versus what she wants are two totally different things in the end. Now, I know there's speculation too, because at the masquerade ball, he does meet Sophie, not knowing it's Sophie, and there is this whole Cinderella storyline. It's kind of fun. He's actually become an established painter by then. He has a famous painting that's hanging in a gallery. So Benedict does kind of figure his life out. So I'm happy for him. I know there are some fans who actually want Sophie to be trans. And I think that would be a fascinating storyline, given Benedict's now telling, we want all kinds of love to be possible. But I think too, some fans maybe wouldn't be able to handle it. And I'm not sure. Bridgerton has to think about its audience. But I love the Daily Mail article quoting people who said, I'm never watching after this. Kate, remember when people said that about Downton Abbey? I'm never watching now that, this happened to Anno or that Matthew died. They all come back.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
all want to know how the story ends.
There's always a lot of bluster, but they'll get over it.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to see more balls. You might say there's enough balls already, but I'm hoping to see more balls in season 4 because there was a real celebration of color and experimentation and newness, really, and modernity in this season, which I don't think had come before. And I feel in some ways that is historically accurate, but in other ways, in terms of costumes and makeup, they've moved away from their sense that we have to be strictly accurate. So in season 1, it's a big deal that Daphne gets to put on some rouge. By season 3, Penelope is fully made up, and it doesn't seem to matter that might not have happened in the same way, at the time. It's more about the visual spectacle, and that's really something the viewers are responding to. And it's trying, obviously, to achieve a balance between fantasy, I think what the Guardian called a kind of dreamland that it creates, and historical accuracy. It's done that pretty well in season 3, and I'd like to see more kind of experimentation. It doesn't have to be true to life, because we all know it's not. We just want to enjoy
Yeah.
it.
I didn't hear people complaining this time around about the hair. Oh, their hair wouldn't be down. I mean, Penelope is flaunting a 1940s
Mm,
Veronica Lake do at the
yeah.
end, and I loved it. But you're right, that final ball that the sisters throw, I kept rewinding it. Just the opening was, and those dancers are all so beautiful. The way that the men are holding the women and turning and they're looking at each other, I'm like, this is one of the things that Bridgerton does so well. And you can understand why there are these balls being held all over the world. People are recreating this Bridgerton experience
Mm.
because you just feel like, oh, if only I could have that for 10 minutes to put on a dress like this and have some lovely man or woman twirl me like that. Oh, you just forget everything.
Yeah, that's what we all need, isn't it? Although that
Yeah.
last ball, I was wondering what happened to all the butterflies. There's a real theme running through Bridgerton about the natural world and how we treat the natural world. And I was going, these butterflies going to die at the end of the night? Do you know what's going to go on here? So that bothered me a little bit.
I know, and the CGI effect was a little cheesy there, but absolutely. Then I think about our Victorians who would be pinning them under glass, and like those poor butterflies, nobody respects them.
Oh, so much happened in the season that we could talk about it
I
for
know.
so much longer, couldn't we? Just so many different fascinating storylines. But we have to put it to a close there. But I'm sure we will be back in the future to discuss some more Bridgerton or perhaps another period drama if anything else new hits our screens. You know, I don't know if there's too much coming up at the moment, but we're never too far away from another one, are we? And there's a new Downton film in the works that's been announced, so we're never too far away from a new period drama, which is good for us enthusiasts and academics.
Looking forward to the new Downton film very much.
Me as well. Oh, thank you both, Katherine and Julie, for coming back on the podcast. It's been lovely to have you. And yes, we shall have to speak again soon about some more Bridgerton
Thank you
or
so
other
much for
period
having us.
drama.
Thank you, Beth, and fingers crossed for more Benedict in
It's
season
time.
4.
Absolutely. Exactly. We'll riot if he's not leading the next season, if it's someone else.
Goodbye.
Thanks very much. If you enjoyed today's episode on the wonderful world of Bridgerton, please do go and give us a 5-star review on Apple, which is really helpful. You can also check out our new website at www.historyhack.co.uk, which has some useful links on there, as well as a great big cartoon by Steve and information on the team. If you'd like to support us further, you can do so via Ko-Fi or Patreon. So our Ko-Fi page is ko-fi.com/historyhack, while our revamped Patreon is www.patreon.com/historyhack, and it has lots of different levels on there and various perks for each of those. Thanks as always for your support, and see you next time.